Hello, everybody, both in North America and Europe. And yeah, and now for something completely different, I hope. Still staying on the same topic, but okay. Am I sharing my screen?
Yes, it's great.
Okay. Right. If I can want to get rid of all these pop-up messages, no, to be nice.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's happening. I think our team's trying to work that out.
Yeah, I've advanced my screen here, but it's not appearing at your end.
We can see your slide.
There's the first one, and that's the thing. For some reason, it doesn't want to advance.
Oh dear. Okay.
It is.
There you go.
Okay. I think those messages were interfering with everything. Right. As has been mentioned, I was asked to review Peter's book due to my interest in operational risk and general kind of, I suppose, exposure to the ecosystem in the financial industry. I must at the outset say, even though I have lots of friends in the industry, I take a dim view of how it does lots of things, and operational risk is one of those things. So the first 100 pages or so of Peter's book were both entertaining and informative, but like everybody else, when you read something you agree with and something, as you know to be true, it's more pleasurable than reading something you disagree with. And his description of jungle banks is certainly my experience, not only with complex products and processes, but Andrew Haldane, one of the former directors of the Bank of England, described banks as towers, a Tower of Babel, when it came to the absence entirely of a common language with which to describe products, processes, and the things of interest right across the ecosystem. And if you went into the life sciences and you went to medicine or biology or went to the sciences, you wouldn't find this. They have a common vocabulary. And not having a common vocabulary, of course, makes everything difficult. And it makes operational risk, or the management of operational risk, very much so. And one of the realities with how operational risk is addressed in the financial industry is that it's mainly done through the lens of a risk management framework, which is populated with risk taxonomies, among other things. And one of the inputs into this course is the RCSA, the Risk and Control Self-Assessment, which I find fascinating as an opportunity to tell a nice story, one that's favorable to whoever's filling it out, plus the human, I suppose, propensity for bias. And that's my mind, is pretty much ineffective, as is the whole focus on operational risk losses, both within the institution and without. And I'm here referring to the likes of the operational risk exchange. So once a financial institution has a risk management framework focusing in this case on operational risk, and once it's doing its risk and control self-assessments, and once it has a system of record that maps between the two, the regulators are pretty much satisfied, which of course leaves the whole system wide open to abuse, which I think it is. And of note, and I mentioned it in my review, I think over the last 2 years, there have been two their CEO letters from the Bank of England / Prudential Regulation Authority in the UK. And essentially they were chastising the CEOs for their inability to access reporting data from their systems of record and report that, you know, on a regular basis, systematically to the regulators. I've heard another story from the European Central Bank, in which one major financial institution, European, made 17 attempts to submit the same data and fell each time. Now, the reason I'm mentioning this is that if there are issues with this spaghetti pot, this jungle bank of data with, you know, banks having diverse systems, you go from, for example, HSBC has about 4,500, while Citigroup has north of 70,000 individual information systems. And what happens internally in terms of reporting is, as one executive in State Street Bank put it to me, the cottage industry of manual data collection and reporting. And these are, you know, significantly important banks globally. And yet they can't do this. And so it leaves me a big question mark for me over their willingness to adopt something like AMA2, because they would have to add a layer of transparency to the way they manage operational risk, which they're not doing currently. And in one case, one extremely large English bank, and I can't mention it because a lot of the things that were said to me were done under Chatham House rule, was that it really didn't want the regulator to know what was happening in terms of the way it managed its systems, let alone say gathered data from it. But that's another story. The other thing that I have a problem with are the 3 lines of defense. Peter mentions that the third line of defense, the internal auditing, is ineffective. Well, I raise a big question mark over the second line of defense. I think it's marginalized as well. I think there's a lack of integration there between the risk function and those who manage the business and achieve business objectives, who rarely understand the risks that they're undertaking, and rarely understand how fragile, particularly even with digital transformation, that there's the small thing somewhere hidden deep in the digital infrastructure, which is vulnerable, for example, to either failure or cyber threat. And when that thing goes, you know, down goes core systems or an inability to conduct critical operations. And another thing I've got, and it relates to the 2 Dear CEO letters, is the inability to do risk data aggregation. I know Peter has a certain view on this, and I agree with him. But again, the inability of banks to comply with BCBS 239, for example, is an indicator that there's something rotten in the state of Denmark. But however, moving on. I know it's problematic to see this, and I know that because yesterday I was giving a lecture on data modeling to students in the business school. And as you can quickly see here, I'm not data modeling per se. In order to understand AMA2, I decided to model it. And I'm modeling it using something called object-oriented modeling. I'm not going to give you a tutorial in that. It's all boxes and lines. You can easily understand them. There is a syntax, there is a meaning to the symbols, but again, we don't have the time here to do it. But I just want to draw to your attention certain things. First of all, if you see the bottom, the left-hand side down and the bottom, you will see maybe things that you've seen already in the previous presentations. The business components. If I was to model them like I've modeled everything else, this diagram would be incredibly large. Likewise, the control categories. And if one I suppose, exploded or drilled down deeper into each one of those control categories, generic or technical, one would discover subcategories which would lend more granularity to the control model. And that's not a critique. I mean, that's an assumption, I suppose. In his book and in presenting AMA2, Peter can't do everything. But nevertheless, there is beneath this, a whole range of complexity and modeling, which modeling of business components, be it activities or reference data, or core systems, and various other operations that underpin a banking enterprise, as well as controls. And what is lacking is this type of model. Now, just attending to this model of AMA2, what type of model is it? In my language, it's called an ontology, which is simply a shared conceptualization of a particular domain. If you went to biology, you would find ontologies in biology that would underpin the various systems they have, not only in terms of classification, but not understanding how the various things act and interact. So in order to understand AMA, I decided over the last week to create an ontology. In other words, to identify the high-level things or categories of things that are important to it, and map in some way how they relate to each other. I'm sure something like this, you'll all kind of want to either read a book or look at the other presentations, and if you did, you will arrive either, I suppose, mentally, or begin to take notes and arrive at this point. So when the slides are shared, hopefully you'll be able to map through it. But an ontology has another significance. I mean, most firms have their own information systems, and one would hope that some bank somewhere, some institution would pilot AMA2, and it's one of the things I think that Peter and I certainly would hope would happen. And they may not be open to using, say, a risk box, for example. But with a model like this, with a machine-readable ontology, this is a human-readable ontology. With a machine-readable ontology, there would be additional semantics, and the model would be captured in a machine-readable serialization. And all of those things exist. Take, for example, something that you deal with day to day, Wikipedia. Wikipedia has behind it something called DBpedia. And in DBpedia is all of the data that exists in Wikipedia. And you could, if you had the time to do it, but if you're technical, you could query Wikipedia because it's got an ontology and it's got a particular query language to extract data and visualize it. Okay, no AI is necessary for this. Well, AI is being used because the ontology that the folks in Wikipedia have built, and as people in universities have done, allow you to do that. But in many financial organizations currently, they're using ontologies to do data virtualization because they know, they need to change how they're doing it. And so if one was to build a system that would implement AMA2, this is the way to start. So I would hope that that would be one takeaway message that you would, at least from my session, that there are tools and techniques out there by which you can model your data from a very high level, and then if a business component table or database was created, likewise, you know, the risk taxonomy that would be populated, and control taxonomy and control databases would all be accessible. And then it only fell to creating the rules and processes, calculations to calculate the exposure uncertainty factor, the value band weighting, inherent risk, risk mitigation index, and residual risk calculations. But there's more to Peter's book. In writing a paper in and around resilience, I wanted to create more of a thought experiment in use case. So what I did was I created another ontology using slightly different way of representing the things, and here it is. And what I'm trying to model here, and I'm just using FX forwards, that particular product as an example of the complexity, not only of the activities that go into transaction processing, but also the other elements like reference data management. And again, there would be reference data management databases that one would draw upon to populate this. That ultimately, that product or general category of products are related to the business model and would have objectives, and on the left-hand side would have underlying information assets like applications, and data assets like databases, and some of the applications that Peter mentions in his book and in the appendices, and which are generally true. You find them in any major financial institution, are displayed on the left-hand side, as well as the generic names for the databases that underpin them. So in using a model like this as an upper level ontology or model, one could federate and integrate the underlying data systems and integrate them. And I've seen this happening in banks, and it works. So it should work here too. But moving on, because I know time is moving on, and I normally run over, and I've been known to teach MBA classes with just one slide. So I'm pleased to be nearly there. But so what all of this, I think, needs is not only, well, a paradigm change in the way operational risk is viewed, and even more so now, since that for the last 2 years, digital operational resilience is now on the mind, well, more on the mind, it'll be on the statute book soon, of regulators. The Digital Operational Resilience Act is almost there, and that covers Europe. US regulators thinking about the same thing, and what stimulates this, right, is the level of digitization that's been taking place across the financial industry. And whereas the benefits of digitization are, as Peter outlined, you know, the ability to process at scale large volumes of transactions, there is a soft underbelly of it, in which is really risk intensive, and that's to do not only with cybersecurity, but the complexity and interaction between technologies that few at board level or below them really understand. AI being one of those, and blockchain being another. And I know folks here are interested in that, and I've been researching on AI now for some time. But I did have the honor of being a part of a European Commission expert group that started out looking at the obstacles to innovation in the financial industry. And this group was heavily dominated by lawyers and ended up looking at risk and the risks that these new technologies, which bring opportunities to innovate, bring. And the risks that we were looking at were chiefly operational risks associated with AI, which includes machine learning, natural language processing, and knowledge representation, like ontologies. But also things, like high frequency trading was in there, but so was blockchain, crypto assets, quantum computing, and the cloud, and third parties in the cloud. So all of these things, there is, I suppose, digital transformation does bring risk and does bring additional operational vulnerabilities, and that's something we all need to keep in mind on. One thing, and my only critique really, is the enhanced risk and control self-assessment. I think we are at a stage in digital transformation in the financial industry in particular, and elsewhere, to be able to seriously consider digital key risk indicators and methods of evaluating self-assessments in order to detect bias if they're manual. And even if they're manual, they should be electronic submissions in order to test for that. And I do know of technologies that are, systems that are available in order that could be repurposed to detect such bias in these RCSAs, because they are critical. And the other thing, of course, is I would look forward to financial institutions and others using digital key risk indicators taken from the systems of record, the transaction processing systems and databases. I know this is possible, but I wonder if there is a willingness to do so, simply because if the Bank of England and the PRA are so frustrated and are demanding it for some time now from banks, and if BCPS 239 wasn't exactly achieved, its objectives aren't achieved, I cast a big question mark over digital, shall we say, enhanced RCSA. And this brings me to my final point, and something I mentioned earlier about operational resilience. And those of you interested in this will no doubt have seen the BCPS principles of operational resilience, which are somewhat, again, underwhelming in that they provide very high level guidance, but I wonder, if anybody knows exactly what they mean. And I take one of them alone, that banks are expected to map their processes in their critical area of critical operations, and do the type of mapping I've showed you earlier in the ontology. And again, I don't think banks have paid enough attention to their systems to be able to do that. But I've seen, at least in one financial institution, and they had it running on a laptop, an ability to manage from a risk perspective their 4,500 systems of record globally. So the technologies are there. Certainly AMA2 is there now. All we need now is the willingness by the financial institutions to take up the baton and run with it, and finally get to grips with operational risk, and maybe then they might be able to manage resilience. Thank you very much.